And so, as you might have been able to tell from the title of this live stream, that it's all about whether Alberta is going to actually secede from Canada or not. And I wanted to do this little follow up because last year in 2025, this was a huge story in Canada because you had these separationists pushing to start a referendum that would have the question, well, that would have the following question on it. The question is, do you agree that the province shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? That was their question. And this struck me as a big deal because back in April of 2025, April of last year, we had the Alberta Prosperity Project, which was spearheading the campaign towards cessation from Canada. And it seemed like they were really getting a little help from Danielle Smith, who is the premier of Alberta. And for any Americans who don't know what a premier is, think about it like this. Every state in the US has a governor, and every province in Canada has a premier. So it's sort of the equivalent. And Danielle Smith, who seemed to be helping the separatists, she's very conservative. In fact, I think she's the head of the United Conservatives, and she tabled a bill which would help make it easier for citizen-initiated referendums to be able to get on the ballot. And that was back in April of 2025 again. And she put forth, this was called Bill 54, which was the Election Statutes Amendment Act. And that would make it easier. Well, it did pass in May of 2025. So when it did pass, it made it easier for citizen initiated petitions to get referenda on the ballot to go through, because that bill changed the amount of signatures that you would need to get a petition on the ballot from 20% of the registered voters in Alberta to only 10% of the votes cast in the last election. So it cut the number of signatures you would need in less than half right there. And again, that bill did pass. And not only did it cut the number of signatures you would need down into less than half of what it used to be, it also extended the period of time that you could use to gather these signatures from 90 days up to 120 days. And so this to me was interesting. And I wanted to just talk about, okay, where is it, how far have they come since then? And while Danielle Smith did seem to be helping the separatists out in helping that push that amendment through, that would make it easier to put such a referendum on the ballot. But she seems to be more covering her own derriere politically, if you know what I mean, because Alberta actually does have a petition, a referendum that's already been scheduled for October of 2026. But that referendum does not include separation. And so it's on immigration and constitutional changes. Mostly it's focusing on the autonomy of the province of Alberta and federal fiscal policy. Because I think a lot of this separatist movement started because I do believe that many Albertans don't want to be Canada's cash cow anymore, right? Because you have Alberta It is much like Texas is to the U.S., Alberta is to Canada, meaning cowboy culture and plenty of Bible banging and drilling and all of this. And so all that's true. And Ottawa, the capital of Canada, keeps pushing more and more environmental friendly legislation, which makes it harder and harder for Alberta to drill for more oil and to transport the oil around. And plus, there's taxation and other fiscal stuff going on. But anyway, excuse me. Sorry. And so that's what's been going on. So I was thinking back then, wow, it looks like they're going to easily get the number of signatures and get the referendum on the ballot. But this year, 2026, starting in January, they started collecting the signatures that they would need. And and so far, they don't have them yet, although they do have until May 2nd to be able to collect all those signatures. And, huh, anyway, sorry, hi to the folks in the chat. It's nice to see you. And anyway, and so someone says, I have questions. What are your questions? Any thoughts? Okay, I guess I will continue on until until I see a question in there. Um, so I was thinking, oh, it's looking nice and easy for the Alberta Prosperity Project to collect all the signatures they would need. But today is, I think, around day 70 out of the 120 days that they have to collect the signatures. Again, they have until May 2nd. Um, and so they have about 50 more days to do it, so it's very possible. Um, yes, I do play the drums. That's why they're there. Those are mine. Anyway, but please, let's stay on topic. We're talking about Alberta's potential referendum here. And so we have uh, the Alberta Prosperity Project that is still collecting signatures. They haven't gotten, now they would need 177,007 or 800 signatures altogether, and they're not quite there yet. And lately, it kind of seems like they're getting a little desperate because they're starting to canvass some Canadian, well, Albertan snowbirds in Arizona and Mexico. And so that's sounding a little desperate to me if they couldn't gather them within the province. But anyway, and so they are, yeah, they are looking elsewhere. And again, they have about 50 days left until May 2nd. And so although Danielle Smith and the politicians in Alberta did help them get a little closer by making it easier to collect enough signatures, and the amount of them to be collected would be a little less. And um, and so that's what's been going on. And I'm kind of surprised they didn't already get to the number of signatures. But it turns out that recent polls are showing, polls of all Albertan residents are showing that about 70% of them are against independence or against separation. Some polls are saying it's more like 65%, some more like 70%, but either way, a clear majority of the Albertan population are not for separation. Although the minority who is for the separation is very vocal, and so they're making big deal about it. And so for me, even though you have about 2/3 of the population saying in polls that they would be against separation, that certainly wouldn't prevent them from collecting enough signatures to get a referendum on the ballot. So that would be interesting to me. And by the way, Alberta would not be the first province to ever hold a referendum about secession from Canada. It's really, I remember last century, in the 20th century, Quebec actually did this twice. And first in the 70s, when the results of the referendum were more like 40% about saying they wanted to secede from Canada, but 60% saying, no, let's stay a part of Canada. Then they did another referendum in the 90s, about 20 years later, and it was very much closer to a 50-50 split. And so I've been wondering for a while if they're gonna propose another referendum. And the fact that Albertans had been making moves towards proposing a referendum seemed to have inspired some of the Quebecois to do the same. But so what you have is, like I said, Quebec did referenda in the 70s and then in the 90s, and a result from that at the hands of the federal government was they passed the Clarity Act of 1999, which would make it more difficult even for a province to secede from Canada. And yeah, I agree with that. I would have thought they would have had the signatures by now, but apparently they don't. If they're seeking signatures from Arizona and Mexico, it seems like they're getting kind of desperate now. And but again, like I said, even though a good 2/3 of Albertan residents would be opposed, or at least they say in the polls that they would be opposed to separation, um, that doesn't mean you wouldn't be able to collect as many signatures as 10% of the previous election. And getting back to the Clarity Act that I mentioned, that the federal government in Canada pushed through in 1999, what that act requires is a so called clear expression of a will by a clear majority of the provincial population. And so it would be up to the House of Commons, so the federal government in Canada, to determine if the results from the referendum actually demonstrate a strong enough majority for separation. So that's interesting that they didn't put a specific percentage on it, they just left it in the hands of the House of Commons to decide whether each referendum gives enough evidence of a clear majority wanting to separate. And so, and if they decided it did, then that wouldn't automatically mean Alberta gets to separate. It would just trigger a bunch of negotiations between the provincial government and the federal government, and negotiations on how the separation would happen and who gets to keep what and all this stuff. So to me, that's pretty interesting how the two Quebecois referenda of the late 20th century prompted the Canadian federal government to at least make it a little harder for a province to secede. And as such, even if the results of the referendum did demonstrate a clear, even if they do demonstrate a clear majority of the population wanting to separate, that wouldn't often automatically mean that they would get to separate. And so let's say, imagine that by May 2nd, they do collect enough signatures to make this referendum happen. And again, the question would be, do you agree that the province shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? That's the question that's being proposed to become the referendum. And given that a clear majority of the Albertan population, according to the polls, would be against separation. I doubt a referendum would actually show a clear majority in favor of separation. Unless, of course, you never know. It's all about getting out the vote, getting people who want to vote for your thing to go to the polls and vote. So, still possible, but I'm thinking it's looking more and more unlikely as the time goes on because I would have thought they would have all the signatures by now. And they still, if they could get them, that would force another referendum onto the ballot in October. But even if it did, I'm thinking it's not very likely that the referendum would result in a majority voting for yes, let's separate. Again, with Quebec, the first time it was only 40% pro separation. Then the second time around, it was about 50% pro separation. And so I don't know. All things are possible. It could end up happening for Alberta, but the more time goes by, the less and less likely it's looking that they will be successful in getting this referendum on the ballot to start with. And secondly, that this referendum would show a clear majority wanting to separate. And then thirdly, that the federal government would recognize the clear majority in favor of separation and be kind enough during the negotiations to let Alberta go. And I think it's a matter and part of Alberta not wanting to be Canada's cash cow and not wanting to be funding Canada so much more. They're putting a lot more funding towards the federal government than they're getting back, and that's my understanding. Although um, I do understand that situation because a lot of the states in the U.S. are the same way, like New York State and California, among many others. We put in so much more money to the federal government than what we get back because it's all about funding the states that don't have as much money, sort of equalizing and whatnot. And so, again, even if a referendum were held, I doubt it would show a clear majority of people wanting to separate. But if it does, that wouldn't be an automatic thing because the Clarity Act of 1999 does not actually determine any specific percentage you would need to show a clear majority. They leave it up to the House of Commons to determine whether it does or not. And so that's sort of worrisome because you would think the House of Commons would have an interest in not approving a separation. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the issue. And yeah, and so I do wonder, and it also seems like Danielle Smith in her language is seeming a little more desperate and a little less sure that this will, in fact, happen. But like I said, I think she's more politically covering her own behind. Oh, that's a good comment. You said my only worry is Trump trying to free Alberta from the from the rigged referendum. Honestly, could see him doing like Russia did to Ukraine. Yeah, I do worry about that because Danielle Smith and her team actually headed down to the US to negotiate with Trump. And to me, that's kind of funny because it's not because the referendum question proposed indicates that the province shall become a sovereign country, which does not necessarily mean it's going to join the US, right? That would be a different thing. That would be getting rid of being a sovereign country pretty much right away. And so I don't, yeah, I don't. Oh, and by the way, I'm not sure Alberta should worry about Trump quite as much anymore because he seems to have his sights set on Greenland for now, which is also scary to me. I would be really or worried if Trump did try to take over Greenland because Denmark is our ally. And they're a member of NATO. So this would put the US in a war against NATO, pretty much. Um, and anyway, so that's all really alarming and whatnot. And let's see, what else did I want to include? Oh, there's also the notion of an opposition group wanted to propose a separate referendum, one that's worded in a way that would keep that's more, yeah, suggesting language. That petition would say, do you agree that Alberta must remain in Canada and any form of separation be rejected? So that's another group of people trying to gather signatures to get a referendum on the ballot. But I don't know, I am going to keep track of this, keep up on what's going on in Canada and specifically in Alberta towards the separation because I'm really, really interested. And it plays as well into how in the US there's a real dichotomy in culture between the North and the South. Much of this probably goes back to Civil War days and whatnot. Whereas in Canada, there's a similar dichotomy between West and East. Like Alberta and Albertans seem to despise, well, the Albertan government anyway, seems to despise all the decisions coming out of Eastern Canada, and by that I mean Ontario and Quebec. And so, yeah, I don't know. I'm really hoping that Canada does stay together, although I'm not Canadian, so I don't exactly have a dog in this fight, as they say. And but I do worry about what kind of a position that would put British Columbia in if Alberta, right next to it, was totally separated from Canada. Yeah, that's worries me. It's kind of like if New York would separate from the U.S., then all of the New England states would be on their own, geographically anyway. Anyway, it's a very similar thing there. And so I did want to do this short live stream just to give some updates on what's going on. And what's going on is that the signatures have not all been collected yet, and I'm not sure if they will ever get them. And if they do get the more than 177,000 signatures that they need to put the referendum on the ballot, according to to the recent poll numbers, it looks like the majority of Albertan registered voters would be against separating. Now, that will depend on exactly which voters do show up to the polls when that happens. But yeah, so far it's looking like, and that's why I put in the title of this live stream, I don't think so, because I don't think it's all that likely that Alberta will be able to uh, pass, well, A, hold the referendum, and B, have a majority vote in favor and a strong enough majority vote in favor of separation that the House of Commons in Canada would actually recognize that as a clear majority of the provincial population. So I will, I do plan to do another video whenever, if they do gather enough signatures to push the referendum through onto the ballot, I will certainly do another video as soon as that comes out, because that would be an interesting development. Or on the other hand, if May 2nd has come and gone and they still don't have the signatures needed, I think that is worth an update too, because again, their time period to collect the signatures runs out on May 2nd. So I will certainly, yeah, find that to be an interesting development. And because, yeah, and just because I haven't done any video on this so far in 2026, I wanted to at least let you all know that I'm still keeping track of it and I'm following that, and we will see what happens. But for the moment, on the date of this live stream, which is March 12th, 2026, it's not looking very likely to me that they will end up um, seceding pretty much because there's several different steps in their way. And one of these being the Clarity Act of 1999 that Quebec did, the federal government did in reaction to Quebec's two referenda um, to make it kind of harder for a province to separate because a province cannot just do that unilaterally. They have to go through the federal government. And and also, I don't see, I've been following this a bit, and it looks like the separatists have exactly zero support among the First Nations, which a lot of the province of Alberta is on First Nations territory. And so, yeah, that's looking like another political roadblock that they would have to deal with. So, yeah, so that's it. Like I said, I don't think separation is likely, in part because it's looking less and less likely that the referendum will get on the ballot. And even if it does, it's looking fairly unlikely to me that the results of this referendum would demonstrate a clear majority opinion of the provincial population, like a clear majority of support for separation, which is what it would need to do to even be considered by the federal government. So there you go. That's it. And by the way, I'm doing a premiere tomorrow night. Tomorrow is going to be another Friday the 13th, just like we had last month. And we will have again in November. And so the premiere, it's all about the origins of dark superstitions such as Friday the 13th, being unlucky, and black cats being unlucky, and breaking a mirror causing bad luck for 7 years. Anyway, so lots of those sort of things, superstitions involving things that within theory cause really bad luck. So we'll be talking about about the origins of those superstitions, and that premiere is 8:30 tomorrow evening, and I'm in Albany, New York, so I'm talking 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. That's what I'm looking at. So hopefully I'll see some of you in the live chat then, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And I'm also very much looking forward to talking to you all as soon as tomorrow. So until then, I guess I would want to say catch you around next time. Bye bye.